given by birthday girl Tyler.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful day. Even amongst the crowds, we know that your son's love is still shining on us. Lord, bless each person in this room. Thank you for the traveling grace that we all were granted coming here, and we ask for that same grace as we return home. Lord, I ask that you uplift all of those who weathered the storm last week, those who lost their homes. We know that material things can be replaced, but we still ask that you uplift them as they go through this trying time. Lord, bless each person here, the food that we receive, may it be nourishment to our bodies, and our bodies to your service. Please, the wrong blessings be as in your son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Tabitha. Scott will now introduce our visitors.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce our guests. And I do, please stand when I call your name and remain standing until all have been introduced. First up, Brent Gibbs is back again. Thank you, Brent, for coming back. Guest for Stephen Ferguson with Sweetland. We also have Heather and Robert Hunterkamp. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. Guests also with Susan Ferguson. And they are new in town, so we welcome you to LaGrange and welcome you to Rotary. Thank you.
Thank you. As I mentioned, Tabitha had a birthday yesterday, I believe. Kelly Scott is today, and Jaja this Sunday, I believe, the 22nd. Club anniversaries, Kevin Henderson is here today, and it's his 6th year anniversary. I should also mention Jeff Lucan is an honorary member, has been, and his anniversary is 42 years today. Just a few announcements before we get to some happy dollars. So if you're doing a happy dollar, be sure and branch around and get that dollar. We're taking silver dollars on the board meeting today. Main topic right after this meeting over there. Main topic of discussion will be our 100th year anniversary coming up September 27th. Remember, the district conference is April 27th through the 30th in Sandestin. Please let me know if you plan to attend. Remember the CART, Alzheimer's Research Trust collection here. She'll take plain dollars, not just silver dollars for that. And you all gotten the information on Brent, if we plan to induct him next week, if that works out for you. Okay, happy dollars. We have a few minutes.
Tornadoes have hit all over the United States at many times, and people are devastated by them. So it's first of all amazing that as much damage as we've had here in Greenville, it could have been much, much worse. I appreciate all the people that work to make this time a time of restoring. I'd be remiss not to be grateful, not to minimize the damage, but to be so grateful of our situation at Lafayette Christian School. Buck Murphy Road was just absolutely decimated. And it's only passable now as of yesterday, and I drove it down and just got goosebumps because we're right next to that. And there were trees that fell that were just 20 feet, 30 feet from our buildings, and just crushed other structures. And we have 11 buildings on campus, and not one building had just any damage whatsoever on it. We did have some damage to things, and that can all be replaced, but also the timing of that, for a school to know that didn't happen when we had 600 kids on campus. It's just really amazing. So we were able to actually serve the community and help parents get back to work, even though with the Early Learning Center open, even on Friday. We had power, and nobody around us had power, you know. So I just rejoice in those circumstances, thank the Lord for that, and thankful for all the people that helped us sort this.
Hello, everyone. Last week I mentioned that we are opening ice fishing play tomorrow night. We're very excited that the playwright Kevin Kling is flying in today and should be on his way to LaGrange right now. He's going to be here tonight as we celebrate our sponsors for the last dress rehearsal tonight and sponsor social. But if you would like tickets, we have shows Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night at 7:30. Doors open at 6:30. You can bring your friends and refreshments of any kind. And then we have Sunday matinee at 3 o'clock. So we hope to see you there.
Thanks, y'all. And Karis will now come up and introduce our program.
I'm very pleased today to introduce my friends from the Callaway Cancer Center, one of my special places in my heart. And it was just a real pleasure to get to know Whitney Willis, who is the director there. And she took over just a few months ago from Charlene McClanahan, who I worked with for many years, who was retired. So I'll start off introducing her, and then two other folks that I'm also privileged to introduce. Whitney came to Wellstar in April of 2021. She's been a registered nurse for 13 years and has experience in emergency department, long-term care, and leadership and nursing education. She has a master's of science in nursing education and is from Texas. And we had a kind of a pre-meeting a couple of weeks ago to talk about this program, and we really got to know each other. I found out that she moved from Texas to Auburn, and I was like, okay, tell me what happened. Well, she and her husband went to Auburn, were living in Texas, came back to Auburn for a weekend, and their children were like, why aren't we living here? So they have moved to Auburn, and we're very happy that she's taken the helm at the Cancer Center. Also, happy to introduce Dr. Adekoye, who is Medical Director for Hospice and Palliative Care. He was just telling us at lunch that he is from Nigeria and has some friends who asked me, he said, wasn't there an international meeting of Rotary in Atlanta a number of years ago? My friends, came to it. So, it just reminds us that Rotary does have such international roots. His medical education was in Nigeria, and he has training, residency in St. Vincent's Medical Center in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and his fellowship at Montefiore Medical Center. I've just gotten to meet him today at lunch. He moved here from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he was telling me how much he is enjoying being in our community and in our medical center. And then Dr. Rob Taylor is the Medical Director of Radiation Oncology. His medical education was Medical University of South Carolina and residency at University of Alabama at Birmingham. Dr. Taylor has been here before and spoken to us. He has not only a medical degree, but also a PhD in electrical engineering from Princeton. And he and his wife Karen and family live here. His wife Karen is a physiatrist. She's a physician and practices in the medical part, Dr. Karen Taylor. So I think Whitney is going to start off, and please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you guys so much for having us today. Karis did a great job really kind of rounding out my history. But it is true, when we visited Auburn for an A-Day game, my children were like, everybody's so nice, why don't we live here? So we just decided, you know what, we're adults and we can do what we want to do, and Houston isn't going anywhere, so put our house on the market and move. It's great, and we haven't looked back. I am very privileged to work with three amazing providers. Dr. Viraconda has been out on paternity leave, and he's unable to join us today. But we do have Dr. Taylor and Dr. Adeboye. I'm really looking forward to just the wisdom and the expertise that they have to offer you guys. Please feel free to ask questions. I do not have a clicker. My children tried to give a presentation on why they needed a phone. So they used the clicker and I haven't gotten it. Pro tip, they don't have that. Dr. Taylor, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and come up and I'll be here.
Okay, thank you. Alrighty, guys. Well, okay. So see what's going on. All right. So thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. I did give a presentation similar to this. I want to say 5 to 7 years ago, somewhere in that time frame. And there's been some updates since that time. So I want to talk about some of that stuff. The title is Stereotactic Radiosurgery, a Cure Without a Cut, which admittedly is mysterious, but I think you'll know what I'm talking about by the time we finish the talk. We're going to talk about a couple of different things. The first thing is, have we made any progress whatsoever in cancer in the last 30 years? We'll talk about that. What is radiation therapy? How can it be used to kill cancer? How does it do it? We'll talk about 2 different types of new treatments, stereotactic radiosurgery, with another thing called SABR. And if we have enough time, I'm not sure that we will, but we can talk about prostate cancer and special kind of treatment. Okay, so progress in cancer. So have we made any progress? 30 years. Well, there's bad news and good news. Bad news is cancer still remains the second most common cause of death in the United States, right after heart disease. But the good news is that we've made significant progress. We have cut the death rate down, I think 32%. Put me next one. There you go. From 1991 to 2019. So that's pretty significant, actually. And why has that happened? Next slide. So people with lung cancer account for the most deaths from cancer in the United States. And we have made significant progress in lots of different cancers, but I'm going to focus on this one in particular right now because it's one of the main contributors. And we have found that more people are being diagnosed at an earlier stage. So if you're found to be at an earlier stage, stage 1, for example, lung cancer, has an 85 to 90% cure rate. Whereas if you're found later, stage 4, that's pretty much incurable disease. So you really want to be found to have cancer. If you're going to be found to have cancer, you have it found early. So more people are being diagnosed at an earlier stage, and we have some new treatments, some of which we'll talk about today. So why are we finding people earlier? Well, lung screening has come onto the scene. So you might be familiar with breast cancer screening. Well, now due to a number of different trials that have shown that there is a significant benefit to screening people that are at high risk for lung cancer, we now have lung cancer screening. What that consists of is a CT scan that's done yearly. It's a low dose, special kind of CT scan, and it's pretty quick and easy to do. People that are eligible or that would be in the category that need to get this done would be people from 50 to 80 years of age, people that either currently smoke or have quit in the last 15 years, and people that have a 20-pack year history of smoking. So a pack year is the number of packs per day you were smoking times the number of years you smoke. If you smoke 2 packs per day for 20 years, that would be a 40-pack year history. So for this screening, you need at least a 20-pack year history. But if you take nothing away from this talk today, I would urge you, please, that if you fall into this category, or if you have loved ones that do, or if you have friends that do, please urge them to go to their primary care physician and get this done. Because of the people that are eligible in this community, only 5% are doing it right now. So we really need to get those numbers up. All right, so let's turn ourselves to the radiation world. So radiation perceptions. Okay, so I'm a radiation oncologist, and even I can admit that radiation in general does not have the best connotations. People get their ideas about radiation from the news, and so one of the things they might think about is the Fukushima nuclear reactor meltdown, or they might just go straight to nuclear apocalypse, zombies. On the other hand, there are the few, mainly my children, that have a more favorable view of radiation. They are hoping every day that I come home like a Hulk or something like that. Unfortunately, not so far. All right, next slide. So, but most people are in the negative perception category. So when I talk to a patient about the fact that they're going to need to have radiation therapy as part of their cancer plan, the first thing that I talk about is what radiation actually is. And radiation is actually not that scary. It is actually, nowadays, mostly high energy X-rays. So you don't feel anything when you're getting these treatments whatsoever. You lie on a table, typically 15 minutes to 30 minutes. The machine clicks and whirs around you. When you get up off the table and leave from that particular treatment, you feel exactly the same as you did when you were walking in. You're not radioactive when you leave at all because you just got X-rays. Typically, you don't lose your hair. Typically, you don't get sick to your stomach. So there are side effects to treatments, but typically they're much less than what patients are expecting. So how does these high energy X-rays actually kill cancer? Like, how does it actually work? So it basically plays on cancer's greatest strength and turns it into cancer's greatest weakness. So to understand that more, you need to look at a particular cell, and going inside a cell, you have about 3 billion base pairs of DNA inside that cell. And for a cell to divide and turn into another cell, which cells need to do, it has to copy all of that DNA, all 3 billion base pairs, and make another copy of it so that there's another copy available for the next cell. Even if you had an extraordinarily fantastic copying machine, you would, even if you made only a 1 in a million error rate, you would still have 3,000 errors over 3 billion base pairs, 3,000 mutations in that DNA. And that would really not work that well. We wouldn't be here if that was the way it was. But God, in His wisdom, has given us some amazing tools. And the next thing, there you go. That thing right there is a bunch of proteins that fit together and literally form a machine that walks up and down the DNA and will actually sense a mutation, a copying error, fix the error, and then keep walking down the DNA. It's pretty amazing stuff. But here's where cancer comes in. What happens when that error checker is actually mutated and the error checker itself no longer works? If that happens, then you have a whole bunch of mutations that pile up within a cell, and suddenly that cell becomes uncontrollable. Those mutations no longer allow the regular genes that stop a cell from growing, and that cell can just start growing out of control. Next slide. Keep going. There's all those cells. So all those cells are growing up there, and that's basically what cancer is cells that are growing out of control, without control of the body. So how does radiation or these X-rays play a role here? Well, these X-rays actually, they do cause DNA damage, and sometimes catastrophic DNA damage. They'll actually rip a DNA helix in half. But it's important to know that the normal cells can repair, because they have a functioning error checker, any of those rips in DNA. Whereas the cells that do not have the error checker working, that's the cancer cells, they can't repair that. It's so catastrophic that the cell just falls apart and dies as we break up the DNA. So it's important to know that cancer or radiation selectively can kill tumor cells and keep normal cells in the same area alive. That's actually, if you think about it, if you were looking at like some important part of somebody's body and they had to have surgery, you have to cut out all of this stuff, normal cells, cancer cells, everything, in order to be able to cut all that out. Radiation therapy can just kind of go through everything and kill just the tumor cells, but leave the normal cells functioning. That's an important rationale for why we use radiation quite a bit. Next slide. So now we're turning to newer technologies. And one of the most fascinating for me is stereotactic radiosurgery, which actually is not surgery, but I'll talk about that in a second. But what it is just very highly focused x-rays that are focused on targets inside the brain. So think tumors inside the brain. So we're focusing all these x-rays. Go back, Whitney, go back.
Sorry.
Focusing all these x-rays inside the brain, and we're focusing them on these very particular spots. This is a little bit different because with these x-rays, the amount of focusing that we're doing, we are literally completely destroying whatever area we're focusing all these x-rays on. There's no surgery at all in the sense that there's no anesthesia, there's no cutting, there's no recovery time or anything like that. But we are doing surgery in the fact that we are virtually reaching inside the patient and literally doing the same thing that a surgeon would. Like when they cut out this mass inside there, we're reaching in with the x-rays without having to cut through all the intervening stuff, and we're actually destroying that area inside the brain, like a surgeon would, but without any of the accompanying cutting and so forth. Next slide. So how can this actually work? Well, you can take a thought experiment for a moment. Let me walk over there for a second here. But if you actually have a person with a tumor in their brain, this is the person's brain's up there. This side over here is one beam of x-rays. This side is another beam of x-rays. They meet exactly over top of the tumor in the center. This side of the brain over here, the normal tissue, gets about half of the dose. This side over here gets about half the dose, but where they sum up in the middle and overlap right over top of that tumor is getting the full dose. Okay, so what happens when we actually do this stereotactic radiosurgery? Next slide. We actually come in from thousands of different angles all over the place, and we're all targeting on one particular target, that tumor. And each of these angles, for example, let's just pretend like we were having one for every degree, so 360 degrees. This part of the brain right here will be getting 1/360th of the actual total line, negligible. But when they all sum up in that one tumor, they all get to a full dose, which completely destroys that tumor. So by doing this, we are literally, like I said before, reaching inside, able to destroy this tumor without touching the rest of the normal brain. So one of the mechanisms that we need in order to be able to do this is these special leads. These leads can move and shape the beam in any direction that we want, and we want them to shape it to look like the tumor itself from any different direction. So that's part of controlling those beams. So let's see if this actually works. I don't know if it will, but see if we can go to the next slide. Or is there a play button? Yeah. So this is, okay, maybe it will. There's actually a play button going to be up here, hopefully. So this is actually a video of actually treating a patient. This is a cartoon. The patient is here. This is the machine that's emitting these x-rays. And these three green things that you can barely see are the actual tumors themselves. This is an actual patient. But these crosshairs are just technical things. These little yellow things right here, they're actually those leaves that I just showed you in the previous drawing. And the leaves move as we treat the patient, and the treatment comes for 360 degrees around. Is there a play on there? Yeah. Let's see if it actually works. Hey, it did. All right. Well, so here you can see that we're coming in from all these different directions, and the tumor, these leads are going to, by computer control, to all of these special locations in order to just focus on the tumors themselves. And by doing that, next slide, we are able to get the dose to the heat map. The dose, like we were talking about before, just focuses on the tumors themselves, and all the rest of the brain is left alone, basically. So most importantly, it really works. So this is the tumor 4. There's nothing there anymore, and so it's very, very useful. So there's lots of other technology that we need in order to be able to do this. I'm just going to talk about one, but you know, it would basically be a bad day if the patient decided that they wanted to move on the table while we're treating. So there's a lot of high value real estate up there that we do not want to mess with, and so we have lots of safety features for these types of treatments. One of them, well, first of all, the patient is in a mask, which kind of holds their head still, but the patient can still move a little bit, a few millimeters inside that mask. We have lasers that track the patient's face and head. They query 30 times a second, where's the patient, where's the patient, where's the patient? If the patient moves less than a millimeter, it immediately shuts off the beam, basically. So we can do this very safely in treatment as well. Next slide. Okay, so lots of things can be treated inside the brain, and we've been treating this for many years now. Actually, next slide. Okay, so SABR is another type of treatment, stereotactic ablative radiation therapy. And my kids, I talked to my kids, this is what they thought I was doing at work, but not that glamorous. But I think it's cool. Next slide, thank you. So SABR is very similar to what we did before, but instead of just working in the brain is a little easier. The brain, there's nothing moving inside the brain. But if you want to take and treat things like in the lung for lung cancer, the lungs are moving. You can't ask a patient to stop breathing for 30 minutes. So you have to be able to treat them while things are moving inside the body. That adds an extra level of complexity, but that can be solved through more technology. So if this one plays, I don't know if it will or not, but essentially there's tumor tracking technology that we have that you're able to track the tumor inside the body, and the beam will only turn on when the tumor is right in the crosshairs, basically. And then it'll turn off when the patient breathes and it goes out, and then when the patient comes back in the crosshairs, it fires again, basically. So that's how that problem's solved. Next slide. We do treat a lot of lung cancer, actually. So the standard of care for many years was getting surgery for this. Now we're kind of transitioning a little bit. So this is an alternative, essentially, to surgery, is doing this treatment. And still, I think I've been doing it here in West Georgia for 7 years now. And I'm still amazed, honestly, to see somebody come off the table without actually having any anesthesia, because I'm used to that type of treatment, and not having any recovery time. Like literally walk out the door after they've been cured of cancer. It's pretty amazing. So, all right, but we can do this for lots of other sites as well, the liver, the pancreas, and so forth, lots of things outside of the brain. All right, am I like eating in Dr. Edwards? 12:43. Okay, gotcha. Maybe we won't go to break therapy. I want to make sure that Dr. Edwards has enough time to do that. So, do we do questions for everybody afterwards, basically? Or do we have questions?
You feel like a few questions?
Okay, any questions on anything I've said? Yes?
I have one. When you're doing the radiation, it's been a myth, I suppose, with a lot of people, that when those cells are broken and are dislodged, that other cells will go through the body and go and travel and mutate and cause the metastatic area. Am I right?
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, and there's been kind of, that's a theory that's been around from folks, basically, and it's similar also to surgery. People have that feeling, if I cut it, then it gets angry and it's gonna grow other places. So that's not really the case at all, actually. There's more complicated things that it's just, the complicated answer to it is, if you start treatment with this, in order to prevent anything like that happening, you gotta keep doing this treatment, okay? It's similar to antibiotics in a way. If you start killing germs with antibiotics, if the first dose of antibiotics is gonna kill all the weakest germs, the strongest ones are gonna be there, and you keep taking your antibiotics. If you stop your antibiotics halfway through the treatment, the strongest germs are gonna survive, and then they repopulate themselves, and that's not good. So in this situation, it's similar. Once you start radiation therapy, you really need to complete your radiation therapy because you'll leave the worst ones behind, but it doesn't do what you're talking about, where it makes it angry or going. Yeah.
So I'm wondering how the process unfolded. Who was the first person to experience radiation coming from various angles, and did you experiment on a primate? Did you experiment on, how did you know it worked?
Okay, so radiation for the brain has been around for a long time, and it's slowly transitioned into this. It was actually done like 35, 40 years ago, but it was a very clunky setup that they actually used. They actually have this, they had something that looks like half this globe, essentially, and your brain went into it. like in the center of this half sphere, and they actually cut holes in all these spots, drilled special holes all the way through, and they had radiation. This is before they had the ability to generate all these amazing things that we had. So they actually had radioactive sources outside each of these areas, and they would pull the plug and let the radiation shine in for the ones that they wanted to shine and not. And they all these shined at one particular point in the center, and the patient would have to be maneuvered so that their brain tumor was at that point where they were all coming together like that. And it was a slow process. It wasn't like a one process. They've been using radiation for brain tumors for a long time, but it was just very crude and not like this at all. And so it went to like a little bit less crude, a little bit less crude, and it was a slow evolution rather than like an all at once evolution. Yes.
Just for clarification, I made Edmondson's question. When you cut the cancer, that's for you?
Yeah, there's no extra. Okay, so if you cut and you leave for certain cancers, if you leave a needle track, like so, where you actually cut and you hold it back through there and you spread some cells through that track, it can grow locally, like right where you seeded the cells, okay? But it's not going to, it doesn't make it so that suddenly it goes to the rest of your body and explodes with cancer everywhere. In order for that to happen, you actually have to have special mutations. The cancer needs one extra mutation than what it has normally. Normally, it likes to grow in one spot, but in order for it to be able to survive in a different soil, somewhere else inside your body, it needs to grow a different mutation that allows it to be there, actually. So that's different than actually cutting it and allowing it to go somewhere else.
We'll have time for more questions at the end.
Hi everyone, and thank you for having us here today. I don't have a fancy presentation because my field is a bit more touchy-feely, as people feel sometimes, but we do a lot of great work as well. As Karis already said, I'm a hospice and palliative care physician. The field of hospice and palliative care has been in evolution for the last probably 30, 40 years in the United States. The original word hospice was first used in the 1800s and comes from the Latin or French word called hospitum, which basically is a place of dwelling, for taking care of sick people. The word palliative comes from Latin palliare or pallium, which means to cloak or to soothe or to take care of. The field originally started off as mainly hospice. The first hospice, I think, in the United States was Connecticut Hospice in Branford, and I think that was in the 70s, I think mid to late 70s. And Karis was just telling me that was where they went to visit to establish the hospice unit that we have here in LaGrange, where I work right now. Now, hospice, as we all know, is for the care of people who are at the end of life. Now, hospice in the United States has evolved over the years. There's been a lot of use and misuse, and in the past few years, Medicare, which oversees or governs all of hospice care, has made some changes and some recommendations, which is why you'll probably find out that sometimes, maybe in the past, you could have anybody going to the hospice unit and staying there for as long as possible, but now there's a bit more regulation in terms of who and how. That's unfortunate because in as much as hospice is a Medicare benefit, there are a lot of people doing good work, and there's some people who are not doing good work and have put a lot of scrutiny on the field of hospice as a whole. I think recently there was a New York Times article that talked about some of these bad characters and their impact on the field of hospice as a whole. And so that makes it even more challenging for the work we do. Now, like I said, hospice is basically for people who are at the end of life. Hospice is available for any disease entity. Dr. Taylor talked about cancer here right now. If we look at our hospice patients at any point in time, I'd say probably over 50% of them have a cancer diagnosis. But there are other diseases. Okay, you think of anything else, heart failure, the fact that you have failure there, that tells you that obviously this is a disease that is going to end in someone's death, right? You think of something like emphysema, what we call COPD. You think of the neurological diseases, people who have devastating strokes, multiple sclerosis, ALS, dementia. Those are all examples of diseases for which patients end up on hospice for. Now, the Medicare hospice benefit, I think, was established in 1980. And the whole goal was to make sure that people who are at the end of life are taken care of through Medicare. They're supported, their families are supported, not only on the death of the patient, but for 13 months after the death of the patient. Why 13 months? They give an extra month for bereavement support after the anniversary of the death. And hospice is a team sport. So it's not just the physician who's involved. There's supposed to be spiritual work, there's supposed to be psychosocial work. So obviously chaplains, social workers are all involved in the field of hospice in taking care of these patients and their families. Apart from that, most hospices also provide volunteers because people on hospice, apart from what we see here, maybe go back a bit. So the hospice unit is just a part of the care of hospice. Most patients that we have on our hospice service here in Wellstar, West Georgia Hospice, actually in their own homes or wherever their homes are. So it could be their home, it could be maybe in an assisted living facility. And so you'll find out that most hospices are taking care of people in that kind of setting. The people who you see in units like we have here on the campus here are those who are actively dealing with a symptom that cannot be managed at home. Or they have situations where being at home with family has been overwhelming and the patient or the family needs to take a break. So they come in for what we call the respite stay, which is usually a maximum of 5 days, and then they go back to wherever they came from, which is usually their home, or if that can happen during the process while they're there, we try and get them somewhere else. All that is where hospice takes place. So that is hospice. There are different levels to hospice. Over the course of the last 20, 30 years, there's the development of the field of palliative care. And people ask what that is. So when you think of hospice being care for people at the end of life, right, which is basically less than 6 months or so, palliative care is trying to get people early. Dr. Taylor was talking about people who get diagnosed with cancer. So let's say somebody had that screening for lung cancer, and during the process of the screening, they find the wrong tumor, right? They start treatment, and in the course of the treatment, the person develops some kind of pain related to their cancer that becomes really bad. The oncologists and the radiation oncologists have done what they can. They refer to me as a palliative care physician. How can you help us with dealing with this pain this person has? That's just one aspect. Now remember, they're getting their treatment and they're now being seen by a palliative care physician to help with pain management or any other symptoms. So there are things like nausea, vomiting, depression, anxiety, all those things that come as either side effects of the treatment or as part of the disease that are managed with the ongoing treatment that the person is receiving. Therapy, immunotherapy, or radiation therapy. So the goal at that time is to support the patient going through that process. They are not at the end of life, okay? But we're working with the oncologists to take care of the patient, managing their symptoms, supporting them through that. Now, there's some people who go through a cancer journey and it starts off, well, this is stage 1. And I'm sure we've all probably experienced that. And then over the course of years, it evolves, it becomes metastatic, it's spread all over. Now, eventually, we know that those kinds of patients are going to succumb to death and end up on hospice. What studies have shown is patients who are going through that kind of journey usually have a harder time getting onto hospice at that point in time because it's like, okay, we've done all of these treatments, we've gone through all of these things right now, and now we're getting to a point where we don't have options for treating this disease anymore, or we want to focus on getting you comfortable. The process of getting people from that point to getting on hospice is variable, right, for everyone. How people respond to those things are different. Those conversations are very nuanced. I can tell you one thing one way, he can tell you the same thing another way, and you hear it differently. So part of what the field of palliative care has been focusing on is what we call communication skills. How do you have those conversations with people to make them understand what they're going through? Because sometimes as doctors, we talk a lot of jargon, right? we go above people's heads in terms of what we're trying to say. And sometimes we're not comfortable also, some of us, with having some of these detailed, delicate conversations with patients and their families. So for us palliative care experts, we've been trained, hopefully, in being able to have these conversations, making people understand what's going on. And it's a journey. It's not a one and done kind of situation. So you can imagine somebody who's been diagnosed with metastatic cancer today, right? And they're starting treatment in the next few weeks. The earlier we start getting to see that person, develop a rapport with them, get to know them, get to know their families, get to figure out who's supporting them, get to know how they're coping with this illness. These are all the things that we do. The better for the patient, because then as they're going through the journey of treatment, whatever that course of treatment is, radiation, immunotherapy, chemotherapy, we're kind of developing the rapport with them, kind of figuring out who's there supporting them. If they're not able to make decisions, who's making decisions for them, right? Because that's important. Because for most people, at some point during the journey, they end up in the hospital, right? And they can't speak for themselves. And they never told people what they wanted. And we hear the situation of what it's called to pull the plug or something like that. If you didn't know what your loved one wanted, right, you might be doing them a disservice by not doing the right thing for them. So one of the things we're trying to encourage people to do is what we call an advance directive or a living will. If it's just appointing somebody to be your healthcare agent. So if something happens to me, I can't speak for myself, this is the person speaking for me. If that's all you do, that's fine. But it goes beyond that. Have a conversation with that person in terms of what you want done. I can tell you the number of times I've been involved in situations in hospital for patients who are unfortunately at the end of life, and there's a lot of turmoil, there's a lot of chaos in terms of what would they have wanted, this is what they would have wanted, this is what we talked about, no, we didn't say that. Or the right people are not in the room and somebody else is making decisions, and then the right person comes in and then it becomes chaotic. All those kinds of situations. That's why those things are important. Every state is different in terms of their laws around what we call advance directives. And I think Georgia is one of the states where we have the next of kin law, where if you don't have an advance directive, there's a stratification in terms of who can make decisions, right? So we'll go with whoever the spouse is. If there's no spouse, it goes to the adult children. If there are no adult children, I think the next will be siblings, and then it goes on and on and on down that road. So imagine a situation which is not uncommon. Mr. X is divorced. He does not have an advance directive, and he's been living with Miss Y for several years. And it's a relationship they've had for several years, and everybody kind of has just assumed that's how things are going to go. Unfortunately, Mr. X is in the hospital and cannot make decisions for himself. Miss Y cannot, because they are not legally married, unfortunately. Or the scenario where Mr. X is divorced, he did have an advance directive from 20 years ago that still had Mrs. X on there. Right? I'm telling you stories from what I've seen. So Mr. X ends up in the hospital, and we look at that. Oh, Mrs. X is still the one who's on there, and Mrs. X is still the bit of the divorce 20 years ago. She decides, oh, I'm going to make your life hell. It's an unfortunate situation, but that happens. So that's kind of why some of these things are important, in terms of being able to put the right people in place to make decisions for you when they're not able to. So that's kind of part of what we do as well. All of this leads to a situation where, again, the person who's going through treatment goes through their treatment, we're doing all of these things, and we get to a point where things are not going as planned, and everything goes hunky-dory, everything is fine. And we get to a point where, okay, our options are limited to hospice. We then get onto hospice, and we pass peacefully. That's ideal. Does that always happen? Not really. But this is life. Life is never that easy. So we kind of go with the ebbs and flows as things go on. The main point I'm trying to make here is hospice is end-of-life care when options are limited, right? Palliative care kind of helps you get to hospice, but sometimes we find that those words are used interchangeably. Some of my colleagues prefer not to use the H word because they find that it scares patients. And so they like to use the P word, which is palliative care, when ideally what they're saying is hospice, because they're seeing these patients decline, or they feel it might be more palatable for the person to hear palliative care rather than hospice. The other thing you'll hear sometimes is palliative and supportive care, because some people feel, you know what, you are providing support, so yeah, I'm going to send you to the supportive care team because they don't like to use the palliative care word. So there are nuances depending on where you are and where you go. But I think here with us in West Georgia, we still have hospice and we have palliative care. And we're probably one of the only hospitals around a radius area that has a palliative care clinic, like we have at the cancer center right now. We're seeing not only cancer patients right now, we're seeing patients who have advanced lung diseases, patients who have advanced illnesses of any kind, like I mentioned before, who have needs. You know, sometimes people take their time to make a decision about getting onto hospice. An ideal situation would be where you have care that can be provided for people wherever they need it to be. And I think that's a work in progress right now. I think I'll stop there, just leave it open for any questions you want to have. Thank you.
One quick question, and then you're going to have to catch them afterwards.
So, y'all don't get to have a do-over. How do you keep from burning out? How does your team practice self-care so that you're able to give your best to these people who don't get a second chance?
That's a good question. And that's one of the things that's actually encouraged highly on all teams is that self-care. So you find out what works for you. You take the time out to take care of yourself, because if you're empty, you can't pour into anybody else, right? So whatever it is that makes you, fills your cup up, do that. Meditation, travel, cooking, eating, just sleeping in bed for 24 hours a day throughout the weekend and coming back on Monday, that works for you, fine. If it's partying, fine. Each person has to find out what works for them, for their self-care, to make them more resilient and be able to give of themselves every day. You're right. This is a field that's emotionally tasking and exhausting, and there's a lot of burnout, not only on the physician side, but also on the staff side as well. A great question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the wonderful program. In honor and great appreciation of y'all speaking today, we'll be making a donation in your honor to Polio Plus, which is Rotary's initiative to eradicate polio worldwide. Don't forget, if you can grab them for more questions. You know, we're going to be going over here for our board meeting talking about the 100th year anniversary. Don't forget the card. And next week, don't want to forget, the Right Reverend Willie Edmondson will be our speaker. We are adjourned.